Well, welcome everyone to another Lake Talk live event. It's Thursday. It's the day before day before Friday, so the weekend's coming. So hopefully some of you are able to get out on the water. I'm still waiting a little bit here. We had some great weather earlier in the week, but we had snow, a little bit of touch of snow this morning, so a cold front come in. Um, these events, the whole purpose of throwing these is just to sort of pass along my love for stillwater fly fishing, the tactics I use, and hopefully give you a better understanding so you can go out and use them as well and enjoy success on your local lakes or wherever your travels take you. Tonight I'm really looking forward to our event because I've had lots of requests for information, more how-tos, more techniques on loch style fishing in a controlled manner from a drifting boat. And tonight I've got the benefit of having a real true expert on the show with me tonight, and that's Todd Oishi. And we're going to talk to you about the hows, the whens, the wheres, the whys, the whats, everything you need to know about loch style fishing. So this is what I mean when we're talking loch style. And right after this is over, I'll bring Todd up and we'll get started. So there we go. Hi, Todd. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Phil?
Good. It's great to see you. So, welcome everyone. If you're not met Todd before, well, now you have. And like me, he's a fellow stillwater fanatic. He's a competition fly fisher and loch style expert, and that's what Todd's here for us to talk tonight, as well as his love for fly fishing. And I've used Todd as a resource for many years on loch style, on my development as a loch style angler. Todd actually contributed a lot of information to my soon-to-be released book, The Orvis Guide to Stillwater Fly Fishing, or Stillwater Fly Fishing for Trout. And he's got a pretty impressive resume. You fished, according to your resume here, Todd, I've got you 14 countries around the world and 6 Canadian provinces, catching a wide variety of fish in fish species. You're an 8-time gold medalist, 4 times bronze medalist at the Canadian National Fly Fishing Championships. I had the good fortune to have you as my team captain in 2007, and we were fortunate enough to win the gold medal. I always joke I retired soon after that because there was nowhere else for me to go but down. So I've got my gold medal, and thanks to you for your willingness to bring me on onto the team and for your support during that event. You've earned the title of top rod and individual gold medalist at the Nationals. You've represented Canada's national fishing team for 7 World Fly Fishing Championships, 4 Commonwealth Fly Fishing Championships, 2 United States National Fly Fishing Championships, and the America Cup International Fly Fishing Tournament. And you've recently retired and now get to call Kamloops your home after living in the lower mainland of British Columbia for many years. And Todd, one thing I can say about all that international expertise, besides the numerous benefits of travel, getting to learn from other anglers, new techniques, especially when it comes to lake fishing, is loch style, right? Because that's the only way in competitive fly fishing you can fish lakes, right? There's no anchoring. It's all loch style, all fishing from a moving boat. And it's such a great method to use as well. And it's probably one in North America that's not very well known, I think it's fair to say, or used.
Yeah, it's growing in popularity. Once people understand it and actually try it, they can see the benefit to it. And I've seen it firsthand just through the competitions and just coaching and working with people that have never tried it, the enjoyment that they can get out of it.
Yeah, because I think some people think, may look down on competitions a little bit, but it's funny, right? None of us wants to be skunked when we're out with our friends. So we're always, I think, a little bit competitive with each other. But so many innovations we have in fly fishing today are from competition, can trace back to competitions like loch style we're going to talk about tonight, European nymphing, innovations in fly line technologies. All of that stuff can be traced back to its roots back to competition fly fishing, right? Even things like beadheads came from competition fly fishing. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of, in my sort of comparison, it's like a mechanic who works at a dealership working on cars, or a NASCAR mechanic who's working in the pit crews. Competition anglers try to push that envelope and try to perfect what they're doing and get more performance out of their time on the water. So again, for me, that's been the biggest thrill, is to get a chance to try and improve my skill and just to try and share it with others.
Yeah, that's it's pretty incredible. So let's talk about loch style fishing. What is it? Where did it come from?
Well, loch style fishing originated in the UK. I think between Scotland, England, Wales, and Ireland, they all do fish very similar. As to who originated it, I couldn't tell you that part, but I know there's a long history going back. When we were in Scotland training, I know at Loch Leven, they have a clubhouse, and they had championship titles going back to the 1800s. So it's been around for a long time. But as far as loch style fishing, it's relatively new in North America. But as you said, it's growing in popularity.
Yeah, because here's a picture of you in action. This is over in the UK. Is that correct? You provided me this picture.
Yeah, that's on Chew Valley Reservoir.
Yeah.
Just a great fishery and great people over there.
Yeah, yeah. So that's an idea of what it looks like. And loch is obviously it's just a term for lake, correct?
It is. You know, when
Yep.
you hear the term loch style fishing, it kind of lends itself to being Scottish, because lochs are what they call or refer to them in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
In England, it's more reservoir or lakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's in summary, we're fishing from a drifting boat. We're not anchored, right? We're not trolling, so we're still casting and retrieving. And then the boat itself is controlled by an underwater parachute or a drogue. And that's the image I first showed here. And we'll get more into the drogue types and how to use them in a second. But that's basically an underwater parachute, right? That's holding that boat steady and slowing it down, trolling
exactly. It allows you to drift at a reasonable speed in high winds, or
Yep.
even moderate winds, which can control your ability to retrieve, present your flies at different depths without having to rip them back because you're going too fast. So it breaks the boat and makes the drift speed much more manageable.
Yeah, because I've got a picture here of my cameraman, when I worked with Brett Colpitts, I had to ask him with the drone to take a picture of this, and I'm going to see if I can bring it in, because I used this today to sort of remind everybody about this post, and I'm just banging buttons here as fast as I can to share this view. And it's gone full screen on me. So give me a second here, and I'll just so you see what this looks like from above, so it'll give you an idea of how this drifts. And it's not showing up now. So just give me 2 seconds here. We'll try it again. But why would you want to use loch style techniques while I fumble around and look for this, Todd? What's some of the benefits of fishing loch style over, in British Columbia, where I sort of grew up and did a lot of cut my teeth stillwater fishing? It's definitely, I'd say, a community that likes to anchor, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this is a totally different approach to fly fishing lakes. What are the benefits? Why would somebody want to think about not anchoring and maybe trying loch styling or integrating both those styles together to their benefit?
Well, I think the key or the most important aspect is that you're covering a lot of water and a lot of fish. I myself learned how to stillwater fish through your own clinics on chironomids and such, and Brian Chan's, and reading the Gilly and all the good books that are available in British Columbia. But once I learned how to loch style fish on several trips to the UK just to hire coaches and learn more about this, first thing I realized is the fact that you're covering an enormous amount of water compared to sitting anchored. As you probably realize, when you sit anchored, repetitively casting over the water, the fish are moving around you. In the case of loch style fishing, you're actually drifting towards new areas where the fish haven't seen your boat, your line, or your fly yet. So by drifting with the wind, the first thing the fish are going to see is your fly, rather than if you're trolling or you're anchored where they'll see your line slapping and touching down or dragging behind a boat. In this case, the first thing they'll see is the fly. So you tend to pick off the aggressive or the feeding fish a lot quicker without spooking them, again, because you're approaching them. One big advantage with it too is for those that can't cast very far, you don't need a long cast with loch style fishing. Anchored, some cases you do, to try and maybe present your fly in a region or area that your boat partner or yourself haven't yet placed a fly. But in the case of loch style fishing, you're going to drift onto those spots if you set up your boat properly to get the wind to blow you towards the fish.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think sometimes people think, oh, moving boat, you must be trolling, right? Because that's usually the way people cover water from a moving boat. And again, the drawback to trolling as compared to loch style is you drive over the area you're going to fish through first. Whereas loch style, your flies always precede you, and again you get to cover more water. So I managed to get that picture up I was scrambling around to get. So just to give you an idea here, you can see the boat drifting here, my marlin drifting nice and square, and there's the drogue out behind. And this is a paradrogue. We'll talk about the different types of drogues in a second, but just to give you an idea again of how this looks. So we're fishing downwind in this area, right? We actually break the boat into quadrants, and we'll talk about that. But basically, if you draw a line down the middle of the boat, right, Todd? One guy gets left, the other person gets right, so you're not poaching each other's water or tangling up or getting in each other's way. But you're drifting square, and we'll talk about why you'd want to do that as well.
Yeah, the other thing that's important to add is just that the wind is always at your back. So
yeah.
In the case of someone who can't cast that proficiently, you've got that advantage of never having to cast into the wind. So it's going to actually help to increase your distance by having the wind at your back to carry out your cast, especially if you cast with more open loops. It's going to help sail and present your fly a little bit further if you want a longer cast.
Yeah, and the boat is always moving. So in this image, if you were to take a shot and this camera hadn't moved, 2 minutes later, that boat would be further down the screen, down the image, moving from top to bottom and just covering water. I find it a great method whenever, if I've anchored up and that's not working, is to go find some fish somewhere, right? Even if you might spend all day loch styling because it works so well, or you might find another isolated pocket of fish, and you never would have found them if you weren't moving and prospecting for it.
Yes, sometimes what I do is I'll actually start out loch style fishing. If I find a place where fish are highly concentrated, or maybe there's a hatch going in a special place on a shoaler or a weed bed, then I'll drop anchors sometimes and take some stationary casts. But for the most part, I would prefer to drift in a sort of a grid pattern to cover water and cover fish, rather than sit there and continually slap the water with a cast. Okay.
So let's talk a little bit about the boats, because you're fishing, and you can do this both from a boat, and I know anglers that also practice and do it from pontoon boats as well, and probably even a float tube to some degree, although the boat is probably the most commonly used platform, correct?
They are. I actually fish loch style out of my kayak too.
Oh, okay.
In this case, I'll just throw I've got a miniature drogue where I could put a bucket with some holes drilled in it, just off a string tethered to the back, just to keep me so I'm with the wind at my back.
Okay, got some. Nicholas is a fan here. I've got a picture of these are sort of the boats that are commonly used over in Europe, particularly in England. Are these dories, or they look like clink style boats, right? And they're beautiful boats to drift out of, aren't they?
Yeah, that was a picture I took when I was there for the World Championships in 2008 in Scotland. 2009. But those boats, we went ahead a year ahead of time just to pre-fish the venue. It's Loch Leven. But those boats actually are so heavy and well built. They're perfect for loch style. They don't even need a drogue. You could be out there in gale force winds and you're just barely moving along. So if I had the resources or the time, which I might, being retired now, I would love to build one of those boats one day.
Yeah, because they're so heavy, they drift. Because the reason we have to use the drogue or the underwater parachute is because most boats, like you and I, fish out of aluminum boats. I know I do. I think you do as well most of the time. And they're pretty light in the bow, aren't they? And if they're left without any way of control them, that light bow spins downwind, and now you're drifting bow down and two anglers in the boat. It just makes for not a very fun or productive experience.
Yeah, it also is beneficial to use your drogue because you're not the boat is not sort of crabbing, as you would call it, like going
Mhm.
side to side. That way the anglers aren't getting frustrated because someone's casting onto their half of the boat. So it
Yeah.
allows for a much more pleasant time in the boat with your partner.
Yeah, yeah, much more. And that drogue really slows that drift down. It's amazing how it bites in and holds. There was a question. I'll bring it in now, and we can touch on it from Mike, friend of mine in the Edmonton area. He says, "I usually see anglers in lock style using a plank or a thwart, right? Is that regulated or otherwise?"
Yeah, basically for competition angling, thwart boards, as they're referred to, the planks, they're required because they want to have all the anglers spread further apart in the boat and also to be sitting at the same level. They don't want anglers standing up rocking a boat, and it's just basically it's a better platform to be casting off and sitting on. And again, you have the ability, rather than sitting on the boat seats, you can spread further apart. I know in my Lund boats that I use, my 14 footers, the distance we sit apart on the thwart boards is incredible. You'll never hit the other angler with your cast unless there's some bad winds or some bad casters. But again, it's a better way to sit in a boat. Recreationally, I use them all the time, whether I'm anchored or whether I'm fishing lock style. I've got a boat cushion or seat attached to it.
Yeah.
And again, it just makes it a much more comfortable way to sit in a boat.
Yeah, and in England, I think they call them a Rutland boat seat, isn't it? You can actually buy proper because in England, not too many people, I don't think, own boats like we do in North America. We all seem to have our own boat. They would go to a venue, and the venue provides the boats, and then you would bring your seats to sit in the boat you're assigned to that day, right? And
Yeah,
they're quite special. I've seen them with little wheels on them, and the seat folds up, and they fit in the trunk of the car, and very portable and very comfortable. Because I know in the 2007s we had to sit on 2x6s, right? And you made thankfully you did before, because I got there late, as I remember, behind everybody else because I was working. I couldn't get there for practice, and you said bring a seat cushion or something. And boy, that was after day one, my butt was killing me.
well, in the case of fishing competitions, quite often where they're 3 days to a week in advance. And if you're fishing lock style in practice and during the competition, yeah, you want to have a good seat. So
Yeah.
again, it's worth its money in gold.
All right, so let's talk about drogues a little bit. What is a drogue, Todd? What are we talking about?
Basically, the Drogue is just, as you mentioned earlier, it's just a device that's used to slow down the drift. If you don't have a Drogue or you're trying to find a place to buy one, you can go online. But if you want to try it, I've told people through some of my clinics and seminars or just coaching, just to even take a 5-gallon bucket and drill some holes in the bottom of it, maybe a 1-inch holes, and just put it on a rope. It'll do the same sort of effect, not as great in big winds, but it'll allow you to try it before investing the money.
Yep.
Drogue basically has 2 different styles. There's a cone style, which you can see in this picture Phil has here. That's usually anchored to a single fixed point, which is typically the oarlocks or center of the boat. Other one is the Paradrogue, which has 2 mounting points. Those are way more beneficial in high winds. They don't allow the boat to crab or pivot quite as much. So again, the most readily available one in North America is the cone ones. Minn Kota sells them. There's a few other companies, but the ones, if you're wanting to buy one, I highly recommend the Paradrogues. They're much more efficient.
Yeah, this is one here, a company in England called Winchwood. They're not easy to get over here. What I like between the two, Todd, is this one has the 2 attachment points, and I generally, as you saw in that overhead shot earlier, I like to attach mine close to the stern and close to the bow, and I find that Drogue, once I deploy it, self-centers, right?
Exactly.
The boat.
Yeah.
Whereas with the conical style, you kind of have to find the balance point of the boat.
Yeah, the nice thing with the Paradrogue too is if it's mounted correctly close to the bow and the stern with the 2 points, you can actually motor your boat with it in the water. You don't actually have to retrieve and pull it out whenever you want to move. But with the cone style, you have to retrieve it whenever you're going to reposition the boat. Otherwise, it's going to act as a brake and not allow you to move forward. But the Paradrogues can actually ride on the top of the water, and you don't even have to fuss with them once you've set it.
Yeah, I love mine. I got mine. It's a Grays, I think. I got a number of years ago. I think it cost me 15 pound. It probably costs more nowadays, and it's in a little zippered bag. It comes with me every time I go out on the water. It's super easy. If I want to change up, I just deploy it, and like you said, it can, when I want to, head back up and drift again, I just make a nice wide turn, and that it trails along behind me. You don't want to make an acute turn because you might be spending a few minutes or hours digging it out of your electric motor prop or worse.
Yeah, that's right.
But you also provided me with an image of, that the conical drogue deployed as well. And I've got an image that you provided me of that, and I'm just going to grab it here. Here it is. And we show the viewers what we mean by the conical drogue, or what's often referred to, if you were to go looking for it, is a sea anchor, correct?
Yeah, or they'll call it a drift sock also.
Yeah. And I remember talking to a mutual friend of ours, Pete Erickson, who was with the U.S. team. He always recommended getting the biggest sea anchor or conical drogue you can, because you're not quite using it in the way sailboats would use it, or conventional anglers. I know walleye anglers use it from time to time to slow their boats down while they're working their lures and things as well. We're using it to as much surface area as I guess as we can to slow things down. But that's your conical Minn Kota drogue right there in the deployed state.
Yeah, that's correct. The other thing that's key, you can see in the photo here on my drogue, is I actually put a buoy, like a little float. What this does is that if the wind slows down, or if there's sticks or branches underneath the surface, it keeps you from snagging on them and possibly losing your drogue or getting yourself into trouble because you're anchored if it's windy. So again, it helps to ride a little bit higher. There's two different models of the Minn Kota. I highly recommend the Pro one. It's actually has foam floats built into the rim or edge of the drogue, so it actually rides up higher, and it sort of avoids that snagging on the bottom.
Yeah, I've got a picture of one here just so people know what we're talking about. I'm just going to stop this one and bring in this other. Can only bring one image in at a time, but this is the Minn Kota one. I've got one of these as well. It's kind of my backup and you can also they've got drawstrings at the narrow end, right? So you can open and close these drogues to further influence the speed of your drift.
Yeah, you can. And also key, if you do purchase one, you'll notice a yellow strap when you're retrieving or pulling it out of the water. You want to grab it by the yellow strap. It helps it to sort of collapse on itself. Otherwise, you're pulling like a big bucket of water out of the water each time.
Yeah, I think I've got that with your drogue. I'll bring that image back up again and show them what you mean, because it's got a great example of what that looks like. So there it is. There you can see it sort of running from the bottom right up into the center of the screen, and you would literally grab that to collapse it, right?
Now what I do, just being a competition angler, trying to save time and be more efficient, you'll notice there's a smaller cord or rope that's underneath the one that's floating. That's the one that I would grab a hold of and pull that. It would collapse the drogue at 15, 20 feet out from the boat. So rather than pulling it into the boat and then trying to grab the yellow strap, I've attached that cord right to the very tip of the drogue or the cone where it narrows, so I can collapse it out far and pull it in really fast.
Yeah. Okay. No, yeah. So that explains it there. I got a question here. Is that the same as a sea anchor? Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, I think we covered that. A good question here as well is, how windy is too windy?
Actually, the windier it can be, honestly, I'm happier. Yeah. There's times when I fished anchored, you'd watch people on Tunquo. As soon as the wind comes up, they all go in. If I'm camping or if I'm fishing there, when the wind picks up, I'm going out. If it's too windy, it's going to capsize your boat. It's not worth risking your life for fish. But the windier it is, typically it'll be more productive because, of course, on the top of the surface of the water, the chop is going to make the fish come up closer to the surface. They're not going to be quite so intimidated by a clear glass, ceiling above them. So when it does get windy, you can generally have a little bit more success fishing and, again, finding fish in the shallower or up higher in the water column.
Yeah. And, you mentioned about too windy, because there is a risk in really extreme winds where that Drogue could bite down, and then tip the back edge, the upwind side of the gunnel, and take a gulp of water, and that's where it can be problematic. But usually we've all long since we're getting out of here because you're usually taking on it's just not fun to be out because you're taking waves crashing on you and all that kind of stuff. And most of our lakes are pretty small too, because some of those English reservoirs you fished are pretty vast expanses of water, aren't they?
Oh, exactly. Even the prairies, you and I have both fished out in the parklands.
Yeah.
Strong winds, excellent fisheries out there, by the way. But you definitely you have to wear a life jacket when you're in a boat, regardless. During all of our competitions, they're mandatory. And again, it's just common sense. When there's wind, you need to be prepared for it.
Yeah, and that just makes sense, right? I can't imagine anywhere today you wouldn't want to wear some sort of float, especially with the the inflatable ones, the SOS suspender style. Those kind are just so easy you don't even realize you have them on.
Yeah, exactly. And one style I've actually been kind of using lately is the one. It's a Mustang makes one. It's a belt, almost looks like a fanny pack. It's out of the way when you're fishing, but if you need it, it's there in a quick pull.
Yeah, because a lot of them now are water activated. You go in and it obviously senses you. That's somewhere where it's a little too much water. It's not rain, and it'll automatically inflate on you, which is good if you were to, God forbid, you ever knocked your head, right? And you could certainly knock yourself or stun yourself. But so again, this is how we talked about. People probably curious, how do you attach these to your gunnel? This is how I do mine. Hopefully people can see that. Is that showing, Todd?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I just got these big spring clamps from Home Depot, I think, and I just clamp them on and I wrap around a couple times, just adjust it. The English use a lot of C clamps or G clamps. What are you using?
I use I use the G clamp, as you call it, or C clamp. The reason why I use them is that I leave my Drogue in the water when I use the Paradrogue, and sometimes the spring type clamps can move. So once I clamp it to the boat, it's there all day long. It's not going to get pulled and slide around. These
ones have been fine. I have a hard enough time even getting them open. So when they clamp on my gunnel, they're not moving.
Yeah, the spring clamps actually are better in the sense that you can adjust your Drogue so you can angle your boat quicker. The ones I use that are clamped, they're in position. But again, I've got my Drogue set up so I know how I like to fish it. But someone who's trying to learn, the spring clamps are probably better because you can adjust them, move it forward or backward to tilt or angle the boat.
So I guess the question is, where do you get a Drogue in North America? They're not easy to find, or at least I haven't found them. I've always had to most times direct people overseas. I have searched them on Amazon and they do appear. So you may be able to get them there. Any other places you know of?
Well, the Minn Kota is available most places that sell them. But as far as the Paradrogues, I think Flymart website, they're Canadian.
Yeah.
I believe they sell them. Other than that, there's not a lot of companies that are on them yet. I'm sure that if it's the same old thing, it's supply and demand. There's no demand because there's no supply, right? But
although I have seen our mutual friend Devin Olsen, who active competitor with the U.S. team, and he owns and operates the Tactical Fly Fisher. Devin's probably best known for his European nymphing exploits, along with his good buddy Lance Egan. They've done those great Euro nymphing video series. I believe he's in the process of, because he couldn't find a consistent source of developing and designing and building his own. So I would tacticalflyfisher.com. I would keep an eye out there. These are for the Paradrogues, but as you mentioned, Cabela's, Bass Pro. I'm sure other places have your standard conical Drogue, Minn Kota.
There's an Eastern Canadian site that's excellent too, called I believe they're Smart Angling.
Okay.
I think they carry it on their online store too, or if they don't, they probably would bring it in because it's just that sort of a site. But Devin's site's awesome too. It's a great site for river stuff and lakes.
Yeah, it's very distracting.
Yeah, they carry excellent material. Again, so I mean, if you're going to try to buy something, those websites carry stuff that the average store just doesn't have at this point.
Okay, so we've got a question here from YouTube. How big a Drogue would you recommend for a frameless pontoon boat, such as a Skadden?
A frameless pontoon boat, you probably want to have a fairly big one just because you really don't have very much on the bottom to hold you in the wind. So you're probably
Yep.
going to drift along similar to the aluminum boats like John boats.
Yep.
If you want to be creative, you could try to set something up to kind of put something underneath it to slow it down, but you probably want a fairly large one on that kind of a boat.
Yeah, yeah, but you can drift, and I actually find because of the way the pontoon boats drift, feet, you're always drifting sort of chest downwind, and you just chuck it out behind, and it kind of self centers and drifts really quite nice. Other than pontoon boats, because of their dual purpose on rivers, don't draw much water. They can scoot along pretty darn quick.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that you want to do with any of these drogues that you buy is you want to try to add a little bit of weight. What I do is I actually have some large turnbuckles and that have some weight to them. I'll actually cinch them onto the rim of the drogue so that it's going to help it to sink quicker. Because sometimes you'll throw it out there and it'll just float. It's nothing.
Yeah, I've had that problem. It just lies there like a dead bed sheet, right?
Yeah,
Well, not that the bed sheet's
exactly.
alive, but and people look at you. Well, what's so cool about this, right?
Yeah.
And you're
Well,
like, I've had some times where I've actually taken on my Paradrogue, taken the two straps, the ropes, and brought them more centrally into the middle of the boat, and it'll kind of force the drogue to open up more. Sometimes if they're too far apart on the initial inflation, if you will, it's just flat and it can't seem to grab the water. But yeah, you could probably take small weights on clips and just clip them to the bottom. Like you don't need a lot of weight. You're just trying to pull that bottom down a little bit to encourage it to open up and get inflated with water. You're not hanging a downrigger ball off of it.
no, exactly.
No. A good question here about the drogue from Mike Chan, our mutual friend at Islander Reels. Hi, Mike. How much of an obstacle is the drogue when fighting a fish?
It's really not because you're typically fighting a fish in front of the boat. It can be a bit challenging. I've actually lost fish during championships where we're drifting really fast. You hook a nice big rainbow or brown and it goes under the boat as you're drifting over it, trying to play it. And in that case, yeah, I've had them get entangled with a drogue. But if you're fishing in the boat with a partner, typically we'll work together. If we see that's going to happen, the other person will pull the drogue in. If you're by yourself, yeah, you might want to be a bit careful on where you lead the fish. But typically, it doesn't happen that much recreationally for me. It's more in competitions where you're at the mercy of your boat partner wanting to continue to drift and rather than help.
Yeah, it's similar to being double anchored, right? There's always a risk if the fish gets around, because we anchor so they trail out upwind. So we're fighting on the downwind side of the boat. And if a fish does get around there, that's one of the benefits. We'll talk about in a bit about the long rods, right? That you can steer and control fish better with a longer rod because you can reach out and kind of hopefully steer them, do your best to steer and navigate them away from those kind of things.
Exactly. The other thing too, that as I mentioned earlier, that would help regarding that question is having floats on your drogue keeps it higher in the water column, so it's near the surface, so it's not actually going to be sinking down below you compared to a double anchored where you have the chance of two cords down. In the case of a drogue, it's relatively shallow. It's not going to have the cords right underneath you. And if it's underneath you, that's because there's no wind. And if there's no wind, you don't want to use a drogue because it's going to keep you from drifting and moving.
Yep. And there's a good tip for people looking for stillwater materials, and drogues is the essential fly over in Europe. So another question here, drogue size for a float tube, I guess, and a single person pontoon boat. I think we covered that, as big as you can.
If you're using just a regular typical pontoon boat that people are using here, you probably want to use a smaller one. I'm not sure when he said Skadden if he was talking about a big
No, this is another question.
Yeah. So if you're using just a regular pontoon boat, that the typical Kamloops or BC anglers are using that style, you don't want to have a real big drogue. A lot of times you can actually even get away with just using your flippers or your fins to kind of slow down your drift by being in the water and kicking. Just the key is to keep the wind at your back, however you can manage it.
And keep you presenting downwind. You're not spinning left or right. Another question here. So not a Paradrogue on a frameless. You could use a Paradrogue because you don't have to have them spread wide. You could put them almost together like you would on a conical drogue too, the attachment points.
Yeah, people tend to get creative and make it work. So, I mean, I'm sure once you try it, you'll find out what works for you.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's cool. So, okay, so we've got the Drogue deployed. And again, we're using the Drogue to slow the boat down and control its drift so it doesn't start spinning. Particularly with a lighter boat, that bow being the lightest point will spin downwind. And if you got two anglers in, like you and me, Todd, you would have, if it spun, because I'd put you in the bow and because it's my boat. and and so you'd have a great shot at everything, and I'd be staring at your back the entire session.
Yeah, the other thing with the positioning of the Drogue, the clamps, like when you fish competitions, or even if I'm fishing recreationally, I always try to be considerate to my boat partner. So if we're drifting along a shoreline, if you move the clamp closer towards the middle, you can actually angle the boat and still drift, but you allow both anglers to get a shot at a bank or maybe a certain part of the water where fish be concentrated.
Yeah, we could show that in a second. So I'm just going to show a picture here, sort of graphic from my book here, letting it out early, but just basically how we're setting up, right? This is obviously an aerial view. We're casting downwind. The little yellow dotted lines is sort of the partition between anglers. So angler A gets to fish from basically, if noon is straight downwind, noon to say 9 o'clock, and then Todd and spot B would be fishing from noon till 3 o'clock. But usually it's not that much because you don't really want to fish straight out the stern or the bow because competition wise, you're not allowed to fish past the there, are you?
No. Well, when I first really learned loch style fishing, I went to England and I hired a coach named John Horsey, a past captain of Team England, excellent angler, a great gentleman. But I learned so much from my time spent with him. But one lesson that was really hammered to me is the fact that you do not fish outside your quadrant. So by meeting the quadrant, angler A can only fish to that center line, that yellow line, or directly to his right. Angler B can only fish to the center line or directly to his right. Yeah. So you want to fish within your water, but you do not poach, as it was called to me. You do not cast into the other angler's water, even though he might have caught a fish, because technically any fish that are sitting in his quadrant are belonging to him if he can actually catch them. So again, but typically fish are in both. So again, it's sort of considered bad form to poach or cast over into the other person's quadrant.
But really, Todd, this is no different than fishing from an anchored position, because if you and I were fishing anchored, we'd have the same quadrant system going, right? Just to give everybody their space to fish and to cover water. And like you said, if we were both fishing close to the midpoint there, the yellow line, that's like maybe a foot of difference sometimes. So it's not going to make that consequential. Got another question here about the float on the Drogue. Do you add a float to keep the parachute or Drogue up in the case the wind dies?
If the wind dies, I pull the Drogue in immediately. You don't want to have it in the water because there's still even small, little winds that could move the boat. But a Paradrogue in the water could tangle on the bottom. So you do want to keep a float to keep it up off the bottom. But again, in case of when the wind dies, it's out of the water. Yeah.
And a question here, and I bring this up because you mentioned you've done it from your kayak.
Yeah, it works excellent. I used to take my daughter to her dance lessons. I'd pop up to a lake just up the road, and I would throw my kayak in the back of my truck. But the kayak I adapted just by putting a Drogue off the back little handle, tethered it there, and had a quick pull strap to pull it in so I could pull it in and out. But it actually works great. Many times, actually, with a kayak, more beneficial than being in a boat. You can actually drift right up to the fish. I've had them right underneath my hands, almost off the side of the boat, because you have such a low footprint in the water in a kayak, and just the stealth that you have with it. Some cases on small lakes, I'd prefer a kayak over a boat, just because you are sitting lower down too, so there's less chance of fish seeing you.
They're pretty cool nowadays. They're not just your basic sit in there with the paddle and go crazy. They've got, I watched some YouTube with how the bass anglers use them, and holy smokes, those things are as decked out as much or even more so than our average stillwater boat we use for trout fishing. The rod holders and paddle systems, they're quite fascinating.
Go ahead.
The only
flotation device for fishing that really doesn't work well for loch style is float tube. Of course, you're sitting in the water, you're not going to move, so you may as well not necessarily try this technique with a float tube.
Yeah, you'd have to be, I guess you could in a strong enough wind, but usually you can just use your fins. I know some people have done it, but it's generally, pontoon boats, kayaks, and of course boats. And the ultimate boat is those clink styles we talked about in the beginning. You mentioned about changing the position of the ropes so you could crab. And the benefit of that would be, you're trying to work parallel to a shore, so both people can have a fair shot at it. And so hopefully that graphic is showing up here. Yeah, there it is. So we've just shortened one of the ropes, and that induces the boat to drift on a downwind, but on a diagonal. We call it crabbing.
Yeah, and this is where having your clamp system, I mean, it's a bit of a pain if your clamps stick above the gunnel, but in this case, to shorten your cords, you just wrap them around your clamp real quick. So again, it's beneficial to have a sort of system that you're not adjusting it. You're just quickly pulling it and doing a few wraps around your clamp or to let line back out.
That's what I usually do with mine, is just grab 2 or 3 feet, and I might do a little test hold of it just to see how the boat adjusts to that length, and then lock it off. And then you can imagine if Todd and I were both in the boat here and there's a shoal to the right of the boat or some piece of structure we'd both like to place a cast over, we both can while still maintaining our quadrants.
Yeah, so the other thing too is in the case of your picture that you're showing there, if you're angling the boat and drifting along, say, a shoreline, for example, or a weed bed, the person on the stern, the back end of the boat actually has an advantage because his long casts are going to be the first casts the fish are going to see. Because he's angled now, he's got a chance to try and present over the water that the other person's going to follow through and cast on. Yeah.
So that's cool. Okay, we got some questions coming up about fly rods and gear. I've seen a few. We'll bring them in. But let's talk a little bit about, the gear as far as fly rods and what influence loch style has on your fly rod choice. And we'll talk about fly line selection, too, for the condition. So what are your thoughts on fly rods?
Fly rods, all of my rods I fish loch style are 7 weights and 10 footers. I want to have a rod that's a little bit taller, just so again I'm kind of keeping my line higher above the boat, not necessarily close to the other angler, but also I want to be able to play fish a little further out from the boat. In my case, where you're seated, you're technically not supposed to stand up, or you could be disqualified and your fish disqualified. Yep. So you want to make sure you can reach, if the fish is going around the boat, to, as you said earlier, to kind of redirect it or maneuver the way the fish is going. I prefer a stiff rod, reason being if I'm casting and I've got my line out at a greater distance, I want to be able to set that hook efficiently. If you're using a soft rod, same thing with lake fishing, whether you're anchored or drifting loch style. You want to have a stiff rod, because if you're fishing for bigger fish, I've seen it numerous times where people lose fish because of a soft rod. They just can't embed that hook into the mouth of the trout. As they get bigger, of course, their jaw or their mouth is tougher. So again, trying to set the hook at a greater distance, a stiffer rod enables you to have that ability to actually penetrate their mouth with the hook.
I call mine moderate fast. They're not super stiff, but they've got backbone and jam when I need them. One thing I noticed from my experience in 2007 with you was the first day I fished a 5-weight, because most of the times fishing from an anchored position, you make a single cast, you let it sink, or if you're using indicators, you just sit there there's not a lot of casting. But I found, because you're always on the move and you're casting and retrieving and casting and retrieving, you got pretty tired. Switch the next day, based on your advice, we switched up to 6 weights and 7 weights that we had them. And boy, it was letting the tool do the job, right? Exactly. And I know in England, they're using up to 8 weights a lot of times too, aren't they?
Yeah, 8 weights are very common, probably in cases more so. But again, the advantage of the 7 or 8 weights, they allow you to throw those high density lines that have 5 or 4 or 6 even in some cases just can't handle those lines in stronger winds. So again, you want to have the right tool for the right job.
A bit of a rod question here, off subject. Specific fly rods for saltwater you're nymphing, is there a specific rod for chironomid fishing? There's a few companies that are starting to develop um, um, stillwater specific rods, but some of that comes down to individual preferences. But I do like for chironomid fishing a bit of a like as I talked earlier, Todd, that moderate fast action just for throwing indicator rigs, facilitating more open, less tangle prone loops, those kind of things. The rods I'm using right now are the Mystic M series. It's a 10-foot, 3-inch rod. And the rod originally, its roots trace back to nymphing and steelhead fishing on the Great Lakes streams. So it's got a good backbone, but a forgiving tip, so you don't break fish off on the hook set and things like that. So that's been a very good rod for me. But we both agree, right, that longer rods, I'd probably say minimum 9.5, but I use a lot of 10-foot, and I know in England there's a lot of 11-foot rods coming around now as well.
Yeah, in the case of other places other than British Columbia where we have a single fly only rule, you want to have a longer rod because you can space your flies out further without having your top dropper catch on your tip top.
Yeah, you got to watch. You get them too far apart and you hook a fish on the point fly, and now your top, in a 3-fly setup, your top fly or bob fly is now perilously near the rod tip. And I remember one day in Manitoba, I hooked the rod tip with the top fly, and the fish ran and yanked the tip section off, which was kind of comedic, to say the least. And you don't realize how important that tip section is in steering and controlling a fish when you don't have it.
Yeah, and the other consideration too is with your technique. If you're chironomid fishing, you want to have a softer tip because you're using a lighter tippet. If I'm fishing, say, blobs and boobies, or I'm pulling streamers through the water, I want to make sure that I'm using a heavier line just because of the activity or the take when the fish takes it or hits it. If I don't have a strong enough tip, it's going to break off. So again, if I had the smaller tippet or lighter tippet for chironomid type presentation where it's more static and you don't want to have the fish seeing the tippet quite so much, so you downsize. You want to make sure you match your action to that too.
Yeah. Just a little diversion here again on Molina Lake. Molina is a beautiful crystal clear body of water located in the Canadian Rockies near it's in a Jasper National Park, about 4.5 hours due west of where I live. Yes, it would work very well down there because they've got some beautiful even flat shoals as well. Obviously, being in the mountains, it does get a little bit of wind from now and then, and it'd be a great way to cover water there and cover a vast expanse of water to find fish or just sightsee while you're doing it as well. I forgot to mention too, Todd, another advantage of the long rods is the hang, right?
Exactly. That's one of the retrieves. When I first fished with John Horsey in England, I was just amazed at the amount of fish that could be caught so close to the boat. In North America, typically we retrieve the way most of us are taught to retrieve until you see your nail knot or the end of your fly line, pick it up and cast. That's time to cast. But in the case of doing the hang, where you basically at the end of your retrieve, you want to leave your fly almost static or slowly rising, more like an emerging insect. It allows the fish a chance or opportunity to attack your fly. Just sometimes that change in the speed or the direction of the fly is enough to entice or trigger a strike.
Yeah, I always say if you want to add more catch to increase your catch rate on lakes, whether you're fishing anchored, fishing from shore, fishing lock style, as we're talking about tonight, is to incorporate the hang. That slow rod, not necessarily slow, that rod raise at the end of every retrieve to induce any fish that are following the fly to take a swipe at it. Because you probably had it too, Scott, Todd, that you're so excited to cast again or for whatever reason, and you raise that, and there's that vicious swirl, you get a grab, you see that flash of silver, and that's a fish you missed, because as that fly rises and changes speed and direction, that sort of flips their little kill switch in their heads.
Well, there's many times when I've fished in lakes, whether I'm anchored or lock style, where maybe as much as 30 to 40% of my fish come on the hang. Sometimes it's even a higher percentage, whereas a person fishing in a boat beside me doesn't do the hang, and I just notice fish following, or sometimes you don't even see them, they just come out of nowhere. But in the case of fishing the hang, I've definitely had great results compared to other people where they're not doing it. So it kind of
Yeah,
reinforces it for you to see
yeah,
it.
I've talked to other competitors as well, and they said, a lot of times when they're seeing one angler being successful, and they're not necessarily, and they're noticing them taking a lot of fish on the hang. Are they doing a fast rod raise, a slow rod raise? Are they hanging it for a few seconds? Are they hanging it for 10 seconds? I have one memorable fish. I hung it for close to 20 seconds before it rocketed up and ate it. Right, and
Yeah.
that seems like an eternity to hold a fly there and just wait for something. But it's so visual because that fish, it's almost like a dry fly, comes up, turns on it, and takes it going away. It's so
Exactly.
exciting.
Actually, what I do in the case of if the fish you're noticing that they're in the mood to take flies more on the hang, the one fly I use a lot, which people know, it's the vampire leech. It's used fluorescent beads on it. Reason why they can be so much more effective at times, or even on some other patterns, you put a fluorescent bead. If they're taking it on the hang, I'll switch to a bead that is fluorescent so I can see it disappear. If the water is a little tannin stained, I can see that bead as it's coming up. As soon as I see it disappear, I set the hook, and quite often it's gone because the fish is engulfed or swallowed the fly. But if you didn't react, they're going to spit it and drop it. You'll probably find too, if you don't hang, you'll drop more fish on the hang than you'll land at times. Sometimes that just comes down to just not being quite quick enough to react when it goes. But using a fluorescent bead or some sort of sighter on your fly, a hot spot maybe, it allows you to see that the fish is actually taking it.
Yeah, that's a great tip, and especially outside of British Columbia, because I know we've got viewers from outside of British Columbia. We've got, I think, all over some representation from a lot of North America, and maybe elsewhere. Is they in a multi-fly setup, they could on the hang take the fly that's still 3-4 feet down, you don't even see yet, or longer, right? And you can use that high vis fly that you're looking at as a bit of a strike indicator, because it'll all of a sudden zip off to the right or the left or pull down. And that's a signal something's latched onto one of the flies below.
Exactly.
Yeah. So question here, Todd, you mentioned using a bucket. Somebody wanted to know how many holes to drill. And I guess what diameter might fall into that too. That's a great question. Great question, right? Because you could, I'd drill one big hole and I'd be no better off.
You could probably take and maybe drill like 7 or 8 holes, maybe 1-inch holes or even bigger. There's no written rule. It's just a matter of finding out what works for you. But again, any bucket's going to slow you down in the water, but by putting some holes in it, it allows some of the water to escape. So it just becomes, you're not pulling something that's not necessarily slowing you down. Yeah. But by having the holes, it's going to slow the flow or the velocity of the water traveling through the bucket. And again, it'll slow down your boat.
Okay. Well, and there's a good segue here. I just got to find that question where it is so I can pull it down. Is a question, and we're just about to talk about this. So, Todd, talk about some of your leader and fly setups you prefer when lock styling, and I guess stillwater fly fishing in general, because this is always a fun discussion because we're all so different but similar.
Yeah. Well, basically, if you were to look at my line anytime, 24/7, when I fish lakes, whether it's lock style or anchored, I never use a tapered leader. The only time I use a tapered leader is if I'm fishing a single dry on the top. I just basically go directly off the loop that's either manufactured or that I've attached to my sinking line, and I tie just a level diameter tippet rate or leader rate to my flies. Reason being is that sometimes in the water, the different thicknesses, just like fishing in a river, it can make it sink at different rates. So I want to have more of a direct and straight contact. This allows it. Plus, rather than tying handmade leaders that might have multiple knots that can fail. In my case, I have a chance of only 2 failure points, one at the fly line and one at the fly. This is when I'm fishing single flies, of course, but the knot I always do at the fly line is like, say, a trilene knot or a real strong knot that might have 95% breaking strength. And the one at the fly is typically a quick one, like the improved clinch knot, which might be more around 90 to 85% if I'm lucky, breaking strength. Reason being, too, is that if I snag on the bottom or I break off on a real big fish, all I'm losing is the leader at the fly rather than having to tie a whole full length of leader on it. It's just quick to pull it in, tie a fly on your back in action again.
Yeah, I think it's important, too, in competition. You're not allowed to use loop knots, right? Because I use non-slip loop knots all the time because I'm retired and can do that now. but you're not allowed to, right? Why is that? I remember some of the rules asking you, scratching my head in the evenings when we were debriefing. Why is that? Was probably one of my favorite questions.
I don't know. I sometimes I question that one too, but I believe it's because they want you to actually be working the fly. They don't
Mm-hmm.
want it to be that the fly is working itself. So it comes down to the fact that you have to impart the motion or action into the fly.
Yeah.
But that being said, you're putting tungsten on it, or you're putting foam on the back end, so the fly is actually being manipulated by your
Yeah.
timing or design.
And
So
I don't think that open loop it allows the fly freedom of movement, but it's certainly not motorized in a straight way, shape,
yeah,
or form.
it does, as you can appreciate it too. It definitely gives more motion to a fly when you're stripping it. So again, it's beneficial to use it, but there's some silly rules we have that we just don't question. We just accept them, go with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like any sport. There's always a few rules. Of like, why is that? It just is. It's part of the tradition. Just learn to live with it. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and as far as the leader setup, fishing multiples, I'm typically spreading my flies out maybe 5 feet apart. If
Yeah,
I'm
that's like I like.
if I'm fishing two flies, sometimes I'll spread them out 10 feet. Uh,
Yeah.
Quite often, I'll just tie my leaders so that it's maybe 5 to 8 feet to my first fly, depending on the technique and the pattern. And then there'll be 5 feet and 5 feet apart. And again, the reason being, I don't want to have them any further than 10 feet because of the length of my rod. If I were to catch a heavy trout, it's going to bend the rod, and you're not going to net it if your flies are too far apart. Again, you'll hit the tip top, so you have to keep that in mind. If there's bigger fish in the water, you might want to shorten them up. Or sometimes it's been beneficial just to go down to one and leave your tags empty. So,
Yeah.
and each tag is tied on with basically a blood knot or else a triple surgeon, depending whether it's fluorocarbon or monofilament.
Yeah. Yeah, your leader's a little. I'm kind of a hybrid between the traditional tapered leader and your level leader. I've got a little bit of a butt section in mine, maybe 3 or 4 feet, and then it's level all the way along. And I just have that. The leader's got a little backbone in it, and when I'm guiding or instructing others, sometimes people struggle with an all level leader because they are a little more tangle prone. But that's one of the benefits when you're competition fishing. If you screw up your leader, you can quickly rebuild one very, very efficiently. Whereas if you had a tapered leader on, loop to loop connections, and you'd be wasting time, wouldn't you?
Yeah, typically when I'm fishing multiple flies, if you're looking at my boat bag, I'll have anywhere from 5 to 7 leaders pre-tied. So if I do break off or have a tangle, I just quickly snip it off at the fly line and tie it on, and you're ready to go with your flies actually in place on the spools.
Yeah. Question here, and dovetailing into sort of the next part of this is your fly line choice, because we all use the same fly lines, right? We use sinking lines and midge tips and floating lines and hovers and all those lines, but it is a little different in your fly choice, right? Because you've got to factor in the speed of your drift.
Exactly. And just as a general rule, the faster the drift, the faster the sinking line, unless they're on top with floating lines. But
Yeah.
You've got to allow for the fact that you're moving towards the location where you've cast your flies. So if you're going too fast and you have a slow sinking line, maybe a type 3, you're going to be over top your line before it's even reached the depth of the fish. So I'll typically play around with it. If it's a fast drift with strong winds, I'll typically go with a 5 or a 7 to start out. And again, counting down is key, but when it becomes really strong winds, you're sort of at the mercy of just ripping and stripping.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you talk 5, you're talking like a type 5, like a
type 5.
5 inches per second, 7 inches per second. And also you've got that, you taught me that little trick of just as the fly's sinking to always do the slowest of hand twists to stay in touch with the flies on the descent, because you can get grabs on the drop, right? And you want to be able to feel them.
Well, one thing that I try to hammer home to people when I fish with them is the fact as soon as you make your cast, in some cases when my line's in the air even, I actually do 2 quick pulls to get my line perfectly straight laid out. Reason being that when your fly hits the water and just starts to sink, a fish can hit your fly, and unless you have contact with it, you will never know, or you may not know at all. So typically when you get to a lake that you're going to fish on, when you make your cast, you want to give it 2 full arm pulls to get your line straight. If you've never done it, a great sort of example is put on a floating fly, maybe a booby, or maybe you got a gomphosis or something. just experiment, try it sometime. Just cast as much line as you typically would cast out. As soon as it hits the water, give 2 or 3 good pulls, and you wait and see how long it takes for that fly to actually move, which tells you that it's actually tight. You'd be amazed at how much slack actually lands, even though it looks like a straight rolled out cast. So you want to make sure you're stripping right away.
Well, I had an instance in the championships I was in with you in 2007 where I had got we were fishing a clear intermediate line, and I got it all tangled up. And I had made my cast, and I'm drifting down, and I'm fumbling, and, got to get this done. And I get it undone, start stripping, and I've got a fish on right away.
Yeah.
Right. So hey, wow, this is great. And when I got that fish in, that fly was so far down its throat, I had to cut the leader off and leave it in there. And that wasn't a buoyant fly. That wasn't anything. And as I look back, because this has happened a couple other times, anytime I lose contact with a fly like that, the fish comes up, feels no resistance, and its instinct is to swallow it. Right. Yeah. Because it's nothing pulling it back. And it was a halfback I was fishing. So that's, peacock body, nymph pattern. And I remember because my boat partner says, "Oh, you can't count that." So, okay. And you were like, "You can count that." But no, thankfully I didn't let us down too much.
No, you did great. I remember that story and that incident very well.
I didn't know, right? And you just, okay, I guess those are the rules. And, looking back, I should, let me just document it and I'll check I'm throwing it back. Don't worry. It's because it's all catch and release anyway. So, question when we're indicator fishing, if it's slow enough, I have indicator fished out, but there is, I timed it down sometimes, and it can take 20, 30 seconds sometimes for a fly or a team of flies under an indicator to get down. And you may not, in a fast drift, have that luxury to have that happen.
No, and that's a good point, too, is that if you're drifting too fast, it's not going to be as effective because you won't reach it. Key is to make sure you're tying with tungsten beads.
Yep.
Tungsten beads, maybe a few wraps of lead in your pattern. But again, you want to make sure that your fly gets down. If you look in the box of any competition angler, you'll find the majority of weighted patterns are using tungsten just for that reason alone, just to make sure they do get down. Because there's nothing more frustrating than trying to cast over to fish and you're drifting over that location so fast that your fly's never even gotten down.
Some parallels to nymphing on a river, right? When you think about compensating for moving current in a river, you're now sort of the current you've got to compensate for in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I compare loch style fishing in a lot of ways to river fishing. I mean, you watch stationary angling, which I've learned and cut my teeth on. People will sit sometimes for the majority of the morning or the afternoon or even all day on one spot in the shoal. But if you're on a river, proficient anglers are the ones that you see. The ones that are doing well are typically moving around, unless it's migrating salmon that are coming through. But if you're trout fishing, you're moving around. You're trying to find those lies. You're trying to find the spots where there's maybe fish that haven't been pressured or touched yet. But by sitting stationary, you're really limiting what you do. But by drifting, you're coming onto these and you're trying to pick fish off in these locations. And that's what loch style fishing really allows you to do.
Okay. Hey, we got somebody from upstate New York. That's great to hear. So thanks, Rob, for tuning in. Question here from Steve Erickson. You made a comment about different knots for different material leaders. You've expound.
I probably shouldn't have said that. But you basically, you talk to people, they have all different theories on it. But when it comes to fluorocarbon, just being that it can cut into itself a little bit easier, some people feel. I've just sort of gone by what has worked for me. So if I'm tying dropper tags with copolymer, monofilament if you'd call it, but they're both monofilament when you think of it, but nylon or copolymers, I'll tie a dropper tag with a double surgeon knot. If it's fluorocarbon, I'm using a triple.
That's what I do.
Yeah, again, it's just for the reason of it being a stronger knot for the material.
Yeah, I think with a triple surgeons, because I often use a triple surgeons when I'm combining fluoro to nylon or copolymer or monofilament, because it's more of a, I think John Horsey calls them like a strangulation knot, that the materials twist around each other, whereas with a double surgeons, the inclination is that fluorocarbon to more bite into the softer nylon and cause what I call separation anxiety because it breaks. And also I like that the triple surgeons is more horizontal as it forms like a blood knot. So it'll pass, if you're using long leader setups, it'll pass through guides and things and not get the risk of getting hung up on a guide somewhere.
Yeah, and the triple surgeon's a quicker knot than the blood knot, or at least for
Yeah.
me. So I tend to use more than a blood knot. If I'm going to sit down and tie and I have time, I might play around with them. But overall, I use a triple surgeon. And also, what's key is to know which tag to cut. Don't cut the tag that goes forward off the knot. Cut the one, or use the one that's going to you have to cut the tag that goes forward. And
I always say that the way the knot was pulled together.
Exactly.
Right. So when you do a triple surgeon's knot, there's the, let's say, the fly line side of the knot and the point fly side of the knot. I always trim the one on the fly line, because when a fish grabs that tag end, it's pulling the way the knot was formed. Whereas if you use the fly line side, it's pulling sort of against the knot and can stress it and break it.
Yeah. Another thing on knots too is, as far as the knot on the fly, whether I'm river fishing or lake fishing, I've sort of brought up to trim my knot nice and tidy, but try to leave a little bit of a tag. That way, after numerous big fish, the knot's not going to tighten down on itself, and then you're going to pull it through and find a little pigtail at the end. So I try to make sure I leave a little bit of a tag. That way I can quickly inspect the knot when I'm fishing. If it's recreational or competing, I can quickly look at it and tell that my knot hasn't slipped down by the amount of the tag that's still showing.
Okay. Thanks, Matt Hatter Organics. I've seen you on my live talks for a few times now. That's great to see. We got Brian from Oregon, and we got a question here, and we haven't touched on it yet, about figuring out our drifts, how we want to drift, where we want to drift. Do you have any strategies? I know on some of the European English locks, there's historical drifts that are like runs on a river, right? Like a famous beat on the low hole pool or some crazy name like that. But they have specific names in England too, because of their drifts. How do you, what are the factors you use to figure out where to drift?
Well, typically it depends which way the wind is blowing. If the wind is blowing in a certain direction towards a shoal or a weed bed, of course, I'm going to set up further off the shore or my targeted area, because it does take, several yards to get your drogue to deploy and be ready to fish. So, I mean, if you try to set up your drift too close to where you want to fish, sometimes you're right on top of it before you're even ready to throw your fly out if the wind's strong. So I'm trying to set it up so that I'm drifting towards where I want to fish. In some cases, if it's a shoreline or a weed bed that's running along a shoreline, I'll try to set up so that I'm going to drift parallel to it, so I can make some casts at it at an angle. And each drift, I try to move out, so I'm not going to move my boat over the spots that I'm actually going to target on my next drift. It's sort of like fishing in a river. When you're nymphing, you want to cover it with a grid type fashion, where you're covering all of the water, not just repetitively over the same spot. That's the worst thing you can do, because I've seen it, especially with competitions. The benefit is you learn so much because you're observing and watching what other anglers are doing right or what they're doing wrong. Sometimes you learn more from what they're doing wrong, but people who go over the same spot repetitively, the number of fish per drift goes down and down and down. I've seen it time and time again. So typically when I drift, I'll do a drift, I'll move back out. Again, I'm going to motor over the area that I'm not fishing next. Then I'll come over and I'll do a drift, maybe a full cast inwards or outwards. So I'm going to cover new water and new fish. But trying to go over the same area repetitively each time, it's going to be lower and lower numbers, because the fish will have seen your boat and seen your fly and maybe the disturbance you make.
Yep. And I still, when I'm doing it, I still fan cast, just like I would. It's a technique I use all the time when I'm fishing anchored, but always presenting my fly at different angles. So I may make a cast, depending on wind and conditions and things like you talked about, a weed bed or some piece of interesting structure that may be off my left-hand side. If I'm drifting sort of into the screen here, I may place a cast at 9:30, 10 o'clock. I may place my next one at 11, next one at 12, go back again, and just, because you also present, your fly is seen in a different profile too, isn't it? Not always nose down, sideways, different angles.
Depends on where the sun is too. I was always told, and I'm a believer of it, don't pull your fly towards the sun.
Nope.
Because the fish following it, they can't see it. They can't discern the difference of it or recognize it at times. But yeah, fanning your cast is a great way, especially in low winds. Typically when I'm fishing lock style, if you were in a boat with me, I'm fanning my cast. I'm never pulling it over the same spot. The biggest mistake that people do when they lock style fish is they'll cast straight ahead and they'll pull it back, straight ahead and pull it back. What happens then, your fly is only represented or presented to the fish in maybe a 5-foot wide band repetitively. Yeah. By casting at maybe a 45, if I'm doing a medium length cast, I'm probably covering, compared to a 5-foot band as we're drifting along, I'm probably covering maybe 30, 40-foot band of water compared to the 5-foot of my boat partner. So again, you're covering more water, but again, more potentially fish in your cast or your presentation.
I also find it can help in certain situations your fly sink, because it's much like nymphing on a river where you would pitch up into the current to allow it to be drifted down, almost dead drift, to sink down. And then it sort of hits that sweet spot where you anticipate the fish, where you're going to be, make sure you're tight to your flies, all that stuff. The same kind of logic can be used when making those quartering casts lock style too.
Exactly. Nice thing too with the fishing lock style. My daughter, when I started fishing with her when she was younger, she couldn't cast any sort of great amount of distance, but you don't have to with lock style. I typically would just put her on a dive 5 because I know she could cast that all day, and it would sink whether she's doing a short cast or a long one. Her fly is actually getting down and working through the water column, which is key. Again, you want to make sure you cover not only area but also depth. So making sure that you cast on angles, or you cast and you retrieve at the right speed, you can actually allow the fly to sink down and present to different depths. What is really key, just whether you're anchored or drifting lock style, is the countdown method. You have to recognize how many seconds you let it sink before you really work the meat of your retrieve. That way you can recognize what you have to do the next time. There's nothing more frustrating than fishing all day. You finally change something, and then you're into a fish, and then you're trying to reproduce it. You can't. Yeah. So counting down is something that if you're in a boat, you always see me counting down.
Anytime I fish anchored, or always, because you want to, eating a peanut butter sandwich and answering 2 texts and then putting a fly back in a box is not really a countdown system. No. Nothing you can duplicate. Hey, we got somebody from Argentina, Nico. That's great to hear. Yeah. I've had the good fortune to fish Lago Strobel, Jurassic Lake, and that gets windy. That might be a little too much for lock style, but boy, you could, that would light up a fly rod, some of those fish. And Connie from Arizona, thanks for dropping in. That's so good to have these people from all over and the interest in this subject matter, Todd. I think we got something here. Oh, question on shape of drogue you prefer and why?
Actually, when I go out, I carry both. I prefer to use the Paradrogue if it's stronger winds. If I'm fishing in light winds, I'll throw out my cone shaped or drift sock, just because it does allow me to drift faster. It's not going to slow you down nearly as much as a Paradrogue does, but there's times when it's a lighter wind, I actually want to move, but I still want to have the control so my boat's not going to crab or move around. So if you look at my boat when I'm fishing either recreation or competitively, I've got both drogues on hand just so I can use either or. It comes down to experimenting and trying it. Once a person tries fishing lock style and actually works a drogue, you'll catch on very quickly as to when and where to use it. And again, the key is not being too complacent or too lazy and just throwing it out every time, because I've seen people where they're just not moving, or else maybe they're not using it or using it proper. So it actually adds a new dynamic to fishing when you fish lock style. It kind of allows you to look at a lake you might have fished for years or maybe most of your life and have a new approach and new excitement when you go to it.
Yeah. Well, you've given me a good tip there, because I tend to be more Paradrogue reliant. I just like clamp, throw out, self-center, boats locked, let's go. And you made a good point. A couple of years ago, my wife and I were down in Wyoming fishing Monster Lake near Cody, Wyoming. And we ran unexpectedly into a big traveler's sedge hatch, which was good. We had fish eating big bugs on the surface, very exciting. And I tried anchoring, and of course, we would get a few fish, but you could see fish moving and chasing the pupa and the adults all over the place. And I finally said, to heck with this. We had enough of a breeze. I threw the drogue out in about 4 or 5 feet of water, and we had this huge shoal to drift, and just had a great day fishing dries. Pick up, lay down. I didn't have to make long casts. My only criticism was on many of the drifts I never got to cast because my wife was hooking up all the time. I would net the fish. She'd say, yeah, let it go. She's back out there again. She's into another. I just played net boy for the entire drift. So
happy life, you know.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I got lots of great fit. We've actually got if you check my YouTube channel, there is a vlog of that trip on there. Big trout on monster trout on dry flies, I think it's called. Um, Question on the Knolls, North American lock style. Is there a chance of that happening this year, Todd?
This year it's not. I actually sent out a official announcement that's not, just because of COVID travel restrictions, and it's
Yeah,
just not. You just basically can't have gatherings, which is understandable.
yeah,
Hopefully next year.
uh, yeah. We'll have to come. Cast strip to remove slack, then count for depth, and then strip again. Strip retrieve again.
Yes, you basically strip to remove the slack. Typically, on average, when I'm casting a 5, 7, or even a 3 or clear and immediate, as soon as it hits the water, I'm giving it 2 full arm pulls, which is probably, in my case, maybe 8 feet. That'll get my line tight. I'll see my fly usually pop if I'm using something that's floating or buoyant.
Mhm.
And then I'll hand twist, and I'll count while I'm doing the hand twist. A real slow hand twist to make sure I'm keeping tight, especially if the boat is moving or
Yeah,
drifting. You've got to keep tight. If you just leave it there, you're going to develop slack, because you want to have that sensitivity. When they touch or bump your line, you're going to be right on it
yeah.
right
You're
away.
on it, like
Yeah, and that's the benefit. The lines, which I'm sure you're going to cover later, is these low stretch lines are so
No,
sensitive.
we can cover that now. I'm a big believer in the In Touch series from Rio.
Yeah,
Love those lines, and that's one of the reasons is the sensitivity of them.
yeah, they are. And airflow makes one they call it sixth sense.
Yeah,
You know what? I totally get why they called it, because there's been many times when I've been retrieving those low stretch lines that you can I swear you can feel fish are swimming by your fly if it's a big enough fly.
yeah. I think it might have been one of the others said if a fish breathes on your fly, you can feel it. I don't know if they're quite that sensitive, but your average braided core line can stretch up to 30%. So
Yeah,
that's more rubber band than fly line at times. So. A couple other questions here. We've been going an hour and 15 minutes. We get lots of great questions. These are great. Really encourage them. This is how you're going to learn and better understand this method as well. Where can I pick up a Paradrogue? I think we talked about that, but we can go over that again quickly.
I think Cabela's and a lot of fly shops might be able to get them, because Minn Kota is a pretty common, fishing equipment with their motors, their electric
Yeah,
motors.
yeah,
So
that's for the conical ones.
yeah, so
Uh,
if you want to get one of those, you can pick them up that way. But the Paradrogues, unfortunately, you're going to have to order online. I don't know of anybody who's selling local, but again, if you find someone, please send me an email. I'd be happy to have
yeah,
that.
I got mine out of England. That's
Yeah,
where I got mine.
I picked mine up in England too, many years, I think about 15
Yeah.
years ago, and it still works
Oh
perfectly.
yeah, there's no wear and tear on these things. The
No.
only way you would wreck one is if you dragged it down the road because I don't know, you forgot to bring it in at the end of the day and drove off away in a trailered boat, or you sucked it into a prop.
Yeah, even
Which
if you suck them into a prop,
yeah,
worst case, it cuts your cord. The Drogues are made on
yeah,
a.
they just wrap around and
Yeah,
hold it.
they stop your motor. But yeah, you basically, if you buy a good quality one, it's going to last you for a long time.
So Hamish asking a question: in competition lock style fishing, are you using a full sinking line? Are you still matching the hatch, or do you use more attractor flies?
Really depends on the fishery. I'm using typically sinking lines unless I see fish on the top. I mean, there's been times where I've realized that the fish are up top, and actually have won sessions just because I'm the only person fishing dry flies. People tend to get a little caught up in the blobs and the booby fad, or other techniques, and they fish without thinking as much as they would, or analyzing, just because they get a little, I call it lazy. They'll fish a certain way, and they've had success. But you have to adapt to be a good angler, whether you're competition or recreational. You have to adapt. You have to have that ability to think. And I know Phil, being an ex auto body guy just like me, you tend to overanalyze things at times, and
That's the male nature, right?
that's right.
Got a faulty light in the trailer? Rip the
Yeah,
wiring harness out. Don't bother checking the bulb
yeah. That's
or
all the
fuse.
troubleshooting expertise. But what it is a good angler in my mind is someone who can think and adapt on the fly. So as far as trying to match the hatch, it depends on the type of fish. If I'm fishing a fishery where it's like stocked, like the Lower Mainland where I used to live, fish were dumped into lakes. You're fishing those. Yeah, you're using a lot of attractor patterns because they don't really understand or know what natural food looks like at that point.
Yeah, they're still learning.
Yeah, they're still learning. But I mean, up here in the Kamloops region where I now live, yeah, I fish more natural flies. But that being said, there's nothing like a tequila blob being ripped through the water to drive.
No, there's something about that tequila color, which, if you're not familiar, is a vivid yellow, fluorescent yellow back end and a hot safety orange, fluorescent orange front end. And if you had one color of booby, blob, fab, what's it? That would be the colors to have. There's something, and it's funny because there's quite not a renaissance, but quite a growing interest in attractor techniques in British Columbia and in Western North America alone. The blob occupies at least 2 fly boxes in my bag because they work. They're very versatile pattern and they work.
Yeah, and they're good static or ripped 100 miles an hour through the water. I've had success both ways. There's a lot of belief, or maybe people feel to maybe justify them, that they represent Daphnia, but if you've seen the speed I rip them and get success, there's no Daphnia in the world moving that.
But Todd, when we anchor, we are fishing them under indicators like you'd fish chironomid static, and when they're on Daphnia, they'll eat them.
Exactly.
So they do have there's a minimal imitative quality to them. But you made a point about, juvenile fish. I think a friend of mine said they're like a 2-year-old. Everything's in their mouth, right? So such a great analogy. Yeah. So we got Jeff Perrin here from the Fly Fisher's Place in Oregon, asking about hand twists, slow, medium, fast strips, and the roly-poly retrieves with lock style.
All of the above.
Same with Citic fishing static. Yeah. So do you have preferences when you like to use them? What governs which? Always a level of experimentation with every retrieve.
Yeah, you know what? Hand twist is extremely effective for like fishing nymphs or dries. Just depends on the speed of the drift. But the roly-poly, if you're going really fast, sometimes it's only a choice you have to keep in touch. But as far as a retrieve, everybody has got their own retrieve that they like to do. I kind of do a stutter retrieve at times where I really jerk the fly, so it's not just being moved or quick stop. Mm-hmm. It's actually jerking through the water like a stutter. Also, it's kind of humorous in a way, but when I fish some competitions, I'll pick a song and I'll strip my rhythm to the song over and over. And if I find success, I know which song I got to strip to. So
country western rap, what?
Yeah. I have one song, I won't say which one it is, but I've had incredible success just stripping to the rhythm because it's not a typical rhythm. That's it's just not a monotonous retrieve. But the key is
I think that's key in any retrieve, right? It's not to be steady. I think the English call it chopping and changing all the time. Different speeds, different lengths of pulls. Nothing swims in a straight robotic pace. They're always stopping, starting, changing direction, diving, dropping down, climbing back up. Yeah, very, very, very important. So you've got a market there, Todd. You could have, Todd's, retrieve album that you download off your app, and you'll have everybody lock styling with earphones in, thinking you're on some kind of radio communication. You go, no, it's just my retrieve tunes.
Yeah, they're actually listed in my my journal in my top 10 hits.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Well, Todd, we've been on here for an hour and 23 minutes. We've had some great questions. I can't thank everybody enough who takes the time to watch these, spend part of their evening with us tonight and asking these great questions. Hopefully people better understand lock style fishing, what it's all about, its benefits, why you should try it, why you should add it to your repertoire. I don't know about you, Todd, but I believe you should learn as many different techniques when you're fly fishing, and particularly stillwater fly fishing, as you can, so you can adapt to whatever Mother Nature or conditions throw at you on any given day. So again, Todd, thanks so much for coming on tonight. Where can people find additional resources to learn more about lock style fishing?
If I've actually got a website forum called the Innovative Fly Fisher. If you go on there, there's actually a section or sub-forum that's dedicated to stillwater fishing competition style. And there's a lot of talk about lock style fishing on there, or they can email me if they have questions. I'm always happy to respond and try to help fellow anglers out with advice.
Okay. So that's the innovativeflyfisher.com.
That's correct.
Okay. Let me I can put that up there. So when this, because this recording will be available after. So I'll just put that back up here. And also I can put your email address up there as well. camloopsguide@gmail.com, or again, the innovativeflyfisher.com. So that's great. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this this episode tonight. I see everybody is there's somebody saying make a Spotify list. So again, everybody seems to have enjoyed this, found this valuable. Again, if this whole episode tonight was a result of your feedback of viewers and listeners. So please, if there's other Stillwater specific topics you'd like me to touch base on and bring a guest in, as highly qualified as Todd, please let me know. More than happy. Again, if you're catching the tail end of this or only come halfway through, don't worry. As soon as this shuts down, it will be available on both my Phil Rowley Fly Fishing Facebook page and my YouTube channel as well, so you can watch it as many times as you want, whenever you want, and again, pick up the pearls of wisdom that Todd has passed on tonight. So thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next broadcast.
Thanks.